Something's a bit deeper than skin shear.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and I'm not okay. I'm not. Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in X-Men 97, Episode 5. Remember it. And I'm still not okay, guys. I'm still not okay. Now, there is so much to break down from this episode. All the mutant cameos, the layered meaning, and of course, that gut punch ending. Guys, seriously, I am still not doing okay. So in honor of Remy's heroic sacrifice, we designed this new Remember It shirt at our merch store where we design all the merch ourselves. I love the details in this shirt, like how the Queen of Hearts hair actually looks like Rogue's. The link to buy the shirt is below, and as always, guys, shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel so we can keep making videos like this one. Thank you for watching. So, let's break this baby down. Gambit does the previously on.
Previously on X-Men.
Fitting since this episode ends with his heroic sacrifice to save Genosha. Now, there are a few new changes during the opening credits. One, notice how Jean is back to wearing a ponytail in the opening credits as opposed to Madeline, who lets down her hair. We also see this shot from season 4 of Cable fighting Apocalypse in his temple in the future, of course foreshadowing Cable showing up later in this episode. And the opening credits keep showing us shots of Jean as the Phoenix. Now, I think there is definitely something to that. Madeline had psychic visions in episode 1 and 5, and all of these could be connected to the Phoenix Force. In fact, in the comics, the Phoenix Force is what awakened Madeline from her sleeping pod when she was originally cloned. And then we see Storm winning leadership of the Morlocks from Callisto back in season 1. Now remember, the Morlocks are these sewer-dwelling mutants who live as outcasts. In episode 2 this season, Magneto saved them from the Friends of Humanity.
You shall never be afraid again.
And then he sent them off to live in Genosha.
Not a great plan.
Then we see Nightcrawler and Gambit fighting, which could be from the season 4 episode Bloodlines. Notice how Nightcrawler is using a sword because in the comics he is an expert swordsman. Now, that particular episode is important for a couple reasons. It's when Nightcrawler and Rogue learned that they were essentially adopted siblings. Mystique is Nightcrawler's birth mother, and she's also Rogue's adopted mother. But also, it's when Nightcrawler learns that his half-brother is Graydon Creed, the racist leader of the Friends of Humanity.
What did we ever do to you?
You were born.
Now, in that episode, Creed fights to rejoin and lead the Friends of Humanity. And in episode 1 this season, we see that group trying to rebuild by using Sentinel tech. So really, the attack on Genosha in this episode is an extension of the hate that we saw in the first episode. It's all attacks by evil humans using evil Sentinel technology. So Doug, what do you think about that? Dude, what are you doing? Shh.
I'm on the Silver King, person.
Oh man, that one's so good when the billionaire wakes up from Cairo's sleep and there's all these aliens around. Right now, I'm on transmission.
Oh yeah, that one's really good too.
Right?
What are you guys even talking about?
Oh, we're reading these animated short stories on Storyverse.
Oh, what's it like?
Well, it's like these edgy, short animated series, like the next step of comics into a read-watch format. Storyverse has gorgeous animation, great stories, and they're the sponsor of this video. Storyverse works with writers and animators to make sure that every story feels different and original. They have different styles of animation, 2D, 3D, anime, whatever is best suited for that particular story. Like, I love Storyverse because I get tired of doom scrolling on my phone. Instead, I can read-watch a compelling story that's way more entertaining than a TikTok or Doug's Instagram.
Yeah, I can be pretty boring.
Like I said earlier, I'm on this dystopian anime called Transmission, in a future where everyone gets infected by these cybernetic tattoos. It's a new concept told in a way that I've never experienced before. Seriously, I think this format is going to be the way of the future. You get a mix of visual art that can also take you inside of a character's mind without clunky narration. These are mature stories that are just addictive as hell. So the app is available for free at the download link in the description below. You can also follow them on @Storyverse for upcoming trailers and BTS content.
Oh, that sounds pretty great. I'll check it out.
So then we go to a news report by reporter Trish Tilby, who in the comics is Beast's girlfriend. Now they allude to his attraction here with him getting all dressed up and even wearing an ascot to the interview. Notice the TV screen aspect ratio here is 4:3, which was the style at the time. And then we see the title of the episode, Remember It. Now, the title has several meanings. One, it is obviously foreshadowing Gambit's final line.
Remember it.
But also, the episode is entirely about memory. Jean is grappling with her identity, unsure of which memories are hers and which ones belong to the clone. Scott is struggling with the memory of his son, and he's confused about his feelings. The episode is asking us what makes someone who they are. Is it their soul, or are we simply the sum total of our memories? Rogue is also struggling with her memories as she recounts her past relationship with Magneto, and Magneto gives a long monologue where he recounts Charles telling him his dreams for the very first time. But of course, the true meaning of the title is about this Holocaust on Genosha. How will this day be remembered? As a day of mourning or as a day of vengeance, when mutants began retaliation retaliation against the human world. Trish's narration matches the various X-Men in the mansion, showing runaway teens when she says slip through the cracks, and showing Jean for
desperate to belong.
And these phrases are also describing the mutants on Genosha, runaways and outcasts who just want a place where they can be themselves.
Somewhere there's a place for mutants.
So Magneto, Rogue, and Gambit are going to Genosha in the new Blackbird after the last one was destroyed in episode 1. Here's the TLDR of Genosha from the original animated series. In season 1, Gambit, Jubilee, and Storm hear that this island is a haven for mutants, so they vacation there and ask for the mutant discount. Instead, they are arrested by Sentinels and enslaved because it turns out that Genosha was secretly ground zero for the Sentinel builder Master Mold. They escape slavery, destroy Master Mold, kind of, and then several seasons later, Magneto shows up to liberate the mutants of Genosha and invite them to his new haven on Asteroid M. The last time we saw the island, it was filled with mutants living in small camps, begging Magneto to lead them in a battle against the humans. He declined so he could instead be at his best friend's bedside.
Why now, my greatest enemy, and perhaps my only friend?
Now, in the comics, Genosha has a long history that this episode basically does a speed run of. It was a slave island, then it was liberated in the excellent crossover The Extinction Agenda, and eventually it became a mutant haven, which was destroyed by humans. And then for a long stretch in the comics, Cyclops became more like Magneto, leading a mutant refugee notion on Genosha and essentially abandoning the Professor's dream. So when we land on Genosha, there are so many Easter eggs. The giant statues of Xavier and Magneto call to mind the statues of Argonath in the Fellowship of the Ring. But this is not just a cool Easter egg. This is showing that here, the opposing viewpoints of Xavier and Magneto are both respected, as each man's visions for mutant kind can both be realized at the same time. Mutants can have their haven where they're separate from humanity, but that haven can coexist peacefully with the rest of the world. We see posters that read Magneto is right and posters that read Welcome X-Men. This shows that there may be disagreements among the mutant population, but these disagreements are minor compared to what unites them. Notice how the music here is the X-Men theme played on steel drums. And we also see signs for a flying school showing how mutants are learning to use their powers here, much like they do at Xavier's Institute. But also, we see a sign for Laser Vision Arcade. Now, I think this is very subtle foreshadowing. This is calling back to the very first X-Men episode when Jubilee was in an arcade right before she was attacked by Sentinels. And we also see this ad for forearm sleeves to accommodate mutants like Spiral who have extra limbs. And guys, there are so many mutant cameos here that I'm going to break down for you right now. Big shout out to our editor-in-chief Matt Singer, who helped me out with a lot of these background cameos. This guy is fan favorite Glob Herman, who is lovable because his power is so worthless. This is Pixie from Matt Fraction's X-Men run, and this looks like Idea Quanco from the same era. This is Gargoyle, and this is a poster for Sharp Beauty, which says, finally a service for nails, scales, and horns. So I think this is a play on beauty salons that specifically cater to non-white customers, who know how to style a variety of different hair textures and types. This is subtly pointing out that mutants are another persecuted minority who have to form their own communities. This woman is Lin Lee, who is also from the Fraction run, where Wolverine was headmaster of the school. And this guy made of water could be the show's version of Rainboy. We also see banners with Magneto's ridiculous M symbol from his first good guy suit in the comics and that he wears in this show, and also this poster of him reading Freedom, made to look like the Barack Obama poster Hope. And on this flag is the symbol of Genosha from the comics. And this sign reads Mutants Matter, an homage to Black Lives Matter. Notice the landscape and futuristic buildings. This reminds me a lot of the version of Wakanda from the Black Panther movies. The design of that film was Afrocentrism, the idea being what kind of civilization would Africans have created without colonial interference? And here we're seeing the mutant side of that. What would a nation of superpowered people create if they could form their own communities and nations? Now when they land, they're greeted by Madeline Pryor.
Oh, that's good. I'm real glad she landed on her feet.
Yeah, me too. And then they make this cute little joke.
Luckily, you guys could spare a Jean.
Jean like spare Jean Grey, but also like the extra mutant gene that gives them their powers. Nightcrawler is at Genosha to be on their Council of Faith. And remember, in his debut episode, titled Nightcrawler, we see how devout he is. He's living with monks and even convinces Wolverine to get right with the Lord.
I will trust and will not be afraid.
In this episode, he offers Gambit similar advice.
Love is best measured in what we forgive.
And Gambit even mentions the first time they met when they were attacked by a racist monk.
Didn't go ringing for no priest.
When Rogue says,
It's just like you said it'd be.
Gambit thinks she means the professor, but of course she's referring to Magneto, who was the first mutant leader with the dream that she ever met, but she was repelled by his violence. Now, after the events of this episode, I do wonder if she and the other X-Men are going to start thinking that maybe Magneto is right. And then we see Multiple Man, still in his X-Factor uniform, creating a conga line, and this dancer here is named Exodus. Now, in the comics, he was leader of Magneto's acolytes, who actually nursed him back to health after he apparently died in X-Men #3. We also see the Dazzler, who was Longshot's makeup artist in Mojo World back in Season 2, before coming to Earth to start a singing career in Season 3. Her power is to turn sound into light, which is how she became a pop star in the X-Men comics. The girl in the background here could be Clarice Ferguson, a descendant of Apocalypse. And here next to Rogue, this looks like Boom Boom, who is a member of X-Force in the comics. So then we go back to the interview where Trish Tilby can't resist getting into the human interest stuff and asking Scott about his love life.
Actually, let's talk about you and Marvel Girl. I hear you're the X-Men's power couple.
So this scene is where we really see Scott start to break down. Scott has always been the straight-A student, teacher's pet, but there have been times in the past where he followed Xavier's dream simply because he wanted the approval of his father figure and not necessarily because he deeply believed in the dream. Like I said, there was a whole other arc in the comics where we really see Scott's dark side, and that dark side is hinted at in this scene. In places, he even starts to sound bitter, like Magneto.
I spoke to a Dr. Bryans there. He said you told your teammate told Rogue.
That jerk wouldn't deliver my... He called my kid a freak.
Now, of course, like Magneto, Scott's going through trauma here because he's lost his family. He has the loss of his son, his uncertainty around his marriage. The X-Men fight for a world that hates them, but as soon as Scott gets just a sliver of happiness, something for himself, it's taken from him. So you can't blame him for being resentful.
I lie because the truth is we're nothing like you. Thank God, because it's the only reason you people are still alive.
Meanwhile, Jean is using her psychic powers to create a safe haven for herself in the lake. She's cast physical images of her memories. This one of the entire team is a publicity still for this series, but they simply replace Master Mold with the mountain behind the team. And then we see her as Phoenix with the X-Men and then posing for a photo with Scott. So then, this happens. It's not quite the same passion as the cover of Uncanny X-Men 394, but I like that the show is finally acknowledging that, at least in the comics, Jean has deep feelings for Wolverine. In fact, in the Chris Claremont spin-off series X-Men Forever, she flat out tells the entire team that Wolverine is the man she loves. Now, Jean containing memories inside of these globes is also very much like the memory globe that the Shi'ar gifted to Jean's family after she died. This orb contained a small part of Jean's soul, so she would always be with her family. So before the kiss, Wolverine mentions his age.
I know all about drowning in memories. Best to look up and keep paddling.
And remember, we saw him fight alongside Captain America in World War II back in the Season 5 flashback episode.
By the way, if you're Logan, I'm your backup. I'm Captain America.
Now, going back to the episode's theme of memory, we cut back and forth between Scott and Jean telling the story of when she holds back his optic blast when she was the Phoenix.
Jean was using the power of the Phoenix to block my optic blasts, and we could see each other's eyes.
They anchored me.
Now, this is a seminal moment from the comics, when Jean is able to use her mutant powers to break through Scott's mutant disability and bring them closer together. This is why Cyclops is on a butte in the opening credits of the show. But the thing is, there's now a divide between them. They're telling the story to other people and not remembering it together. And Jean isn't even sure if this memory was hers, or if Madeline was actually the Phoenix all along. I'll also say that the X-Men being public figures and coming out of the shadows was also a really big deal in the comics. They always lived underground, preferring to strike from the shadows, even faking their own deaths at one point. So I wonder how the public perception of them will change after this interview goes public and after the events of Genosha. So then we go to the ruling council of Genosha, which predictably has two members of the Hellfire Club, Sebastian Shaw and Emma Frost, the Black King and White Queen from the comics. Now, in the comics, after Magneto joined the X-Men, the Hellfire Club invited him to become their White King, which is essentially what he agrees to here. Moira McTaggart, the geneticist, is also on the council as a human representative, as is her lover, Sean Cassidy, aka the Banshee. By the way, later in the episode we see him fly, but not with his sonic scream. Probably for the best because it was really strange and annoying, but I always kind of missed the awkward sound he made when he was flying in the original series.
It's Charles!
We also see Callisto representing the Morlocks. Now, one thing you might have missed is that earlier, Gambit mentions how expensive apples are.
Daddy's charging pretty high rent.
This is showing us how there is still extreme poverty on the island, and the Morlocks are the most helpless people. They're forced to live in the open, which is why they are so vulnerable to the Sentinel's destruction later in the episode. Madeline calls Magneto Magnus, which is interesting because this is what Xavier called Magneto when he first described him to his team.
A dedicated young egg named Magnus assisted me.
That's because, in the comics at that time, they They had not even yet revealed that his true name was Eric Lensher. So when they admit that Charles would have been a better Chancellor, Magneto begins to remember first hearing of his old friend's dream, like how Rogue recounts Magneto's dream later in the episode.
He even had plans too, Remy. Mutant art, fashion, dance.
As Magneto speaks, we don't see flashbacks, as this show lets Charles live in memory only. We never see Professor Xavier moving or talking. We only hear people's memories of him.
The professor would shout, "Your childish hijinks have cost you 5 demerits, young man."
But the camera does focus on this ice melting in the glass, which I think is symbolizing how the good times are almost over. Change is inevitable and destruction is coming.
Oh no.
So then we get this tender moment where Madeline is kind of pretending to be Jean.
Describe him to me.
This is also similar to how, after Jean came back to life, Scott initially wanted her to be more like the Phoenix, and how deep down, he always wished Madeline was Jean. It all gets very confusing, but I will say that this psychic rapport that they share is just like the one that they have in the comics.
If you'll excuse us, Madeline.
But notice how right away the telepath Emma Frost knows what's up. Actually, in the comics, after Jean dies, I think the second time, Scott and Emma hook up, and then she helps him unleash some of his darker side that I talked about earlier. Magneto asks Rogue to be his Queen of the Council, which throws her into emotional turmoil as she starts to recall their past. Now, like I've mentioned in past episodes, his ability to counteract her powers was first discovered in the alternate universe Age of Apocalypse storyline when the two of them were actually married. But Magneto and Rogue's sexual chemistry goes all the way back to the end of his hero arc, when the two of them were trapped in the Savage Land together. The clothes she wears in the portrait scene are actually the same ones that she wears in this iconic Jim Lee cover. And in the flashback, when Mystique takes her to go see Magneto, we see him in the Savage Land. And in season 2 of the original series, we learn that Magneto built the Citadel there and fashioned it as an early kingdom for himself. And in this flashback, she wears her original green villain suit from the comics. So Gambit and Rogue are the great tragic love story of the X-Men, both the show and the comics. They can never truly be together, but they're both really horny Southerners. There's like this simmering Bible Belt romantic tension between them that exploded when they could finally kiss in the season 2 Savage Land episode.
Gambit loves you.
But now they can finally air out all of their sexual undertones. As she breaks it off with him, he burns the Queen of Hearts, the same card that he dropped when he first saw Rogue with Magneto back in episode 2, and the same card that appears in this Remember It shirt for sale at our merch store. And then we go to the ball. Hey, look up in the sky there. That is the Watcher. Now, the Watcher in the show What If always appears during significant events to observe them. So this is showing us that right now, some really important stuff is about to go down in this universe. The song playing at the gala is Happy Nation by Ace of Base. And man, this really brings me back to middle school dances. Now, the song is about a utopia with lyrics like Happy Nation, living in a happy nation, where the people understand and dream of a perfect man. The perfect man with the dream being Charles Xavier, the martyr of mutant kind. Person dancing here is Azazel, who in the comics is Nightcrawler's father. This is Archangel, who is a billionaire, so it would make sense that he would be at this hoity-toity event. And then Rogue shows up for a very public demonstration. Her dancing with Magneto is a show of the power of mutant kind, the heights they can climb to. And when he kisses her, this shocks everyone. Because this is also making Magneto seem even more powerful and invulnerable than he ever did before. And then Madeline has a psychic premonition like she did in episode 1. But notice someone shoots a beam at her head. So somebody sent this vision to her mind. We can hear Cable saying, "Turn it off!" Now, in her original vision, she touched the mind of Henry Peter Gyrick and saw baby Nate and then a vision of a speaking whirlwind. Not again. And now we know that this whirlwind is actually her son, Cable, communicating to her from the future. The whirlwind is also like the time vortex that we saw in season 2. When Bishop changed the past, this vortex altered the time stream in the far-flung future of the year 4000.
In the year 4000.
And then Madeline saw the graves of mutants and Master Mold rising from the earth, essentially what happens in this episode. And then they set off an explosion like the blast detonated in this scene. So in this episode's visions, she sees many of these same flashes along with rats, seemingly from the point of view of somebody buried under rubble. Now, I'm wondering if this somebody could actually be Magneto, his point of view after he survives this explosion, and we'll see this scene unfold several episodes down the line. And then the sequence ends with her blood splashing on the floor, foreshadowing the bloodbath that is about to come. But the question here is, who sent her this vision? Was it Cable from the future? Maybe it was Sinister. Or maybe this was her future self, projecting backwards like Shadowcat did in the original Days of the Future Past comics. After Rogue's dance with Magneto, she's underwhelmed, and she repeats Remy's words.
Some things are deeper than skin.
meaning that she finally realizes that she wants to be with Remy no matter what, even if they can't physically touch. Again, this is the great tragic love story of the X-Men. As soon as she realizes she wants him, she loses him.
Oh, happy dagger.
Exactly. So then Cable shows up, and just like we said, he is Scott and Madeline's son from the future, just like he is in the comics. He first appeared in the season 1 episode Slave Island, where he helped liberate Genosha. Now, that actually, him appearing on Genosha, was never referenced again. So now we see that Cable always had an interest in Genosha because he was trying to prevent this mutant holocaust from happening by changing its history. And the first of many, many gut punches in this episode is when they recognized each other.
I'm so sorry, Mom.
And then we see the mutant Marrow, and the channel New Rockstars pointed out that she was on the missing poster in episode 1. Great catch. And then the Sentinels attack, with the new Kaiju Master Mold leading them. Now, it's clear that Gyrick knew way back in episode 1 that this was always the plan.
Did you honestly think we'd roll over and let mutants take over the planet?
That's why that psychic contact affected Madeline so strongly. It's also important to note that she had this vision while she was pregnant with Nathan. So maybe for all of his life, Cable has been haunted by these visions as well, because he also experienced them while he was in utero. There's a heartbreaking moment here where Rogue looks down at Nightcrawler and realizes she can't touch him to help him. Now earlier, she was showing off, wearing a sleeveless gown, finally feeling free in her own skin. But now reality has come crashing down, and she sees that she can never truly be free of who she is and how the world sees her. Everyone realizes that the Morlocks are vulnerable, and this is a loose adaptation of one of the most seminal, important stories ever from the comics, called Mutant Massacre. So in that series, Sinister sent a group of mutants called the Marauders to kill Morlocks in the tunnels of New York, to essentially thin out the mutant gene pool. Those events shook up the X-Men membership for years in the comics, just like how after this episode, the lineup is going to change forever. But Magneto has been here before, and he vows to not live with regret.
We shall not live our days wondering if we could have saved more.
The Xavier statue falls and crushes mutants beneath it, showing how Xavier's dream of peaceful coexistence with humans has actually made mutants vulnerable and led to their deaths. Then Magneto turns the peaceful monorail into a weapon, using it as a whip against the Kaiju Sentinel. So this is bitterly ironic, since the Genoshan slavers used whips to enslave mutants back in season 1, and now Magneto is forced to use a version of this weapon, the weapon of his enemy, to save his people from genocide. Notice in the moments leading up to this, Magneto sees flashes of his time in Auschwitz before declaring, "They shall be avenged!" We see the Morlocks Urge, Annalee, Tommy, and Mask, and we also see Sunder and Ape. And of course, there's beautiful, innocent little Leech. His gift is to drain mutant powers, so by Magneto shielding him, Magneto's actually weakening himself. And then we have his last words to him.
Hab keine Angst.
It's so heartbreaking. Like, Magneto speaks in his native German, and remember, he is a Holocaust survivor who lost his wife and daughter, so this makes you wonder, is this the last thing he said to his daughter before he lost her? Now, I seriously doubt if Magneto is really dead. In the early 90s, after Magneto became a villain again, he was presumed dead for almost 2 years before coming back deadlier than ever. He even pulled all of the adamantium out of Wolverine's body before Professor Xavier was forced to erase his best friend's mind. So I kind of think the show might be building toward that. Magneto will disappear and then resurface, convinced that Charles was a fool, and then Xavier will return from space and have to finally face off against his old friend once and for all. But there is at least one real death in this episode: Gambit. He uses his ability to supercharge objects against the Kaiju Sentinel, knowing this will destroy himself in the blast. But he gets in one last use of his catchphrase that he first threw down in the season 2 finale.
Name is Gambit. Remember it.
Now, I think it's fitting that this Sentinel does not look even remotely human. The other Sentinels, even Master Mold, are made in the image of humanity. But this monster is a symbol of mankind's inhumanity. The idea that a race of people should be eradicated is inherently opposed to what makes us human, which is the ability to connect, to understand, and to share a community with one another. And also notice how Gambit was stabbed in the side, like Christ, before sacrificing his life to save his people. And afterwards, Rogue finally gets to touch Gambit's skin and says this devastating line.
I can't feel you.
I know, buddy. It's a sad one. And when the credits play with the X-Men theme, but softly on piano. And you know, watching the episode a second time, I was thinking back to Trish Tilby's opening monologue, asking how we should perceive humanity.
Some call them monsters, but all over the planet they are known as mutants.
Because that opening monologue poses a question that this finale answers. Humanity will never be able to fully accept mutant kind. There will always be hatred, even when the governments of the world are ready to recognize mutants, or when they're ready to hold a real trial for Magneto, there will always be people who storm the government to demand bloodshed. The head writer and show creator Bo DeMaio said on Twitter, "My plan was that the first half of the season is the OG audience's pre-9/11 days, rife with nostalgia and comfort. Then, 9/11, like Tulsa and other mass tragedies, turned the world upside down and reminded us that the whole world is unsafe. He warned us, and we did not listen." So let me know, do you think that humans and mutants can peacefully coexist, or are we doomed to a forever war between races? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy. Seriously, I'm not okay.